Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 2 of our Grasslands Animal Pack animal review, where we go through all the cool animals that we got in that pack. I know it's a little late, but we're carrying on, and I'm excited to get the second half done. So today we're going to be starting off with a couple species of butterflies, because there was 5 introduced in the pack, and then we'll carry on with our habitat animals. So today we're going to be starting off with the Old World Swallowtail. Let's see if we can find one in here that we can look at. So let's have a look at you, camera. So you can see the wonderful swallowtail. The swallowtail, also known as the Old World Swallowtail, or just the common yellow swallowtail, or even just the swallowtail. Uh, these guys are a really interesting type of butterfly. These guys are found through much of the Paleoarctic. So Paleoarctic pretty much refers to everywhere from like Europe through top of Asia into North America. So they're very, very wide-ranging species with up to 41 different named subspecies around the place. So we can have a look at another one. There we are. Beautiful. So, as I mentioned, these guys are found the entire Palearctic region, so it can be found from Russia to China and Japan, all across to Canada and the US. And even though it has the name Old World Swallowtail, it can be found in the New World as well. And they're actually quite widespread in Europe, and actually the largest butterfly in the UK, other than the Monarch, which is only a rare vagrant there. But they're typically, as I mentioned, found pretty much all over the place as long as you're up in the northern hemisphere. In terms of its description, you can see these guys have yellow wings with these black vein marks on them. They're really beautiful pattern. And they have a wingspan about 65 to 86 millimeters, or 2.6 to 3.4 inches. And the hind wings of both sexes have these like protruding points here. So you can tell this is a male. So you can find a female. I might not have a female in here. But this is what a male looks like, which is quite interesting. So you can find a female. I don't think we can find one right now, but anyway, it's just the main difference is that the males have the blue and and they're like that. So it's really cool anyway, but really awesome. So these wonderful butterflies can be distinguished at the caterpillar stage. They've had a length of about 1.8 inches, or about 45 millimeters, and actually resemble bird droppings, which is actually camouflage for these little guys, which is pretty cool. So in terms of ecology, these guys are strong, fast flyers, and they frequently pass over flowering herbs and sip on nectar, and they're also frequently found in alpine meadows and hillsides. And the males are actually fond of hill topping, where they go near summits and try to compete for passing females, which is pretty interesting. And unlike other members of the group, these guys mainly feed on the family Invertebrate plants, like milky parsley and things like that, are the only food used by the caterpillars of the British subspecies, but they obviously use a few, like hogweeds and things like that. And in Kashmir, these guys have been known to be found in the Himalayas, up to about 16,000 feet, about 4,900 meters, which is pretty interesting. And in lower elevations, these guys will fly from March to September, and in higher elevations, they are limited to the summer season. And the British subspecies is less mobile than its continental counterparts and stays within its kind of habitat, so it could be like a little bit of an adaptation to living on an island, things like that. In terms of their life cycle, these guys will usually brood about 2 or 3 times a year, but in northern areas they may be univolatile. Some places they will pupate and emerge in the same year, and others overwinter as pupae, so it really depends on the area since it's such a huge range. The caterpillar will spend its first part of its life with the appearance of a bird dropping, which is effective defense against predators. And once the caterpillar gets a little larger, it becomes green and black and orange markings. And this is a defense against predators with the form of an opimostrum, which is retractable fleshy projections behind the head that can actually give a pretty foul smell that could be detected by insects, but not birds, which is quite interesting. In terms of breeding, these guys are also pretty easy to breed in captivity. They can be lured to lay eggs in a backyard garden with common root plants, things like that. And once these caterpillars are being collected, they can get in a pot and it was circulation, things like that. The caterpillars are also really good eaters and things like that. And once they hit the pupa stage, you got to be very careful to remove them and put them in a warm location. And then kept in warm summer temperatures, they'll take about 1 to 2 weeks to pupate and become a butterfly, which is really cool. So let's have a look at the Zoopedia for these guys. Let's see if we can find one flying around now. Let's see. I want to see one flying around before we move on. Let's see if we can find it. There's got to be one flying around. Come on. There we are. Really, really beautiful butterflies, if I do say so myself. So, yeah. Let's have a look at their zoopedia. So the Old World Swallowtail, Papalo macon. These are butterflies that live in the temperate regions and even tundras of North America, as I mentioned like that. Pale blue wings and all that. Their sexual dimorphism and the average wingspan is about 6 to 8 centimeters. Really nice to clarify that. You can see their range is actually really huge. So that's pretty much what's considered the Paleoarctic. Pretty much everything from here is considered Paleoarctic. Species 1 to 90 in group size, which excludes juveniles. They have no dominant structure, and they have a polygamous mating system. Males and females are about the same size, 7.5 centimeter wingspan. Life expectancy about 9 months, and weight is unknown. They are sexually mature at about 1.5 months old. They can have babies till they die. Number 3 to 6 babies per offspring or mating event. Gestation period 0 month. The interbirth period is 120 months, and they're easy to reproduce in captivity. So in terms of their breeding, these guys are the largest species of butterfly found in the UK. Mentioned that. The Old World Swallowtail has an orange organ called obermestrum on a head that protrudes and produces foul odors that scare off predators. Mentioned that. The Old World Swallowtail caterpillar is parasitized by a wasp species called the Trogus lepidoptera, which lays its eggs inside the body cavity of the caterpillar and feeds on it while it pupates, the adult wasp emerging from the chrysalis. So that's pretty gnarly and interesting. The tongue of the Old World swallowtail butterfly, is adapted to feed on flowers with many small, thin, tubular petals, such as dandelions. And the Old World Swallowtail is a fast, direct flyer in comparison to many other species of butterflies. And of course, they like hanging out with most other species. So that's our first butterfly done. We're going to be running to the next one. Last but certainly not least, we've got probably the most famous butterfly of them all, the Monarch Butterfly. So let's see and find one in here. So let's look at the camera. Look at this wonderful guy flying around. It's a wonderful monarch butterfly that everyone knows and loves. So the monarch butterfly, also known as simply the monarch, these guys are very wide-ranging. They can be found in America and parts of Central and the top of South America, but they've also been migrated into Europe and have been introduced into a lot of the islands of Oceania, so like New Zealand, Australia, places like that, Hawaii, which is pretty interesting. And as I mentioned, there's a few subspecies, all that. They're pretty much common everywhere, so people like really do know what they are and are quite cool. And these guys, in terms of their wingspan, we'll get through the size of wingspan. They have a wingspan of about 8.9 to 10 centimeters, about 3.5 to 4 inches, so a little bit bigger than most. And they have this quite recognizable black, orange, and white pattern on them, which is quite interesting. And while most populations are doing fine, the migratory population in the US is actually considered endangered, so we'll get into that. So they get the name the monarch because was given in honor to the main color of the King William III of England, which was the Prince of Orange, and these guys are orange, so that's where they got the name, which is quite interesting. And actually, there's also another cool little fact. These guys were the first butterfly to have their genome sequence, and they have about 16,866 protein-coding genes, which is pretty interesting. That regulates most of their behaviors and things like that, which is really, really cool. And like other butterflies, they have their typical 4 life stages through metamorphosis. They have eggs that are derived from injected to larvae by the somatophores that the male receive from males during matings. The females will lay a single egg, usually on the underside of a young leaf of a milkweed plant during the spring or summer, and they'll typically lay about 300 to 500 eggs over a 2 to 5 week period. They've got small oval that are about less than a millimeter length, and they take about 3 to 8 days to develop and hatch into larvae. And they will often eat the milkweeds and stuff like that. And the larvae have these 5 instars where they molt and get bigger. And most people are pretty familiar with what a caterpillar of a monarch butterfly looks like. It's the kind of yellow with black stripes and the long little things like that. And it's quite characteristic, so it's pretty much instantly you see that, oh, that's a monarch butterfly caterpillar, which is pretty interesting. And similar to most other butterflies, once they get big enough, they get into a pupa, into a chrysalis, and the chrysalis is quite greenish, and that's where they spend their time. They hang for a little bit, and then they get to this. Typically, it takes about 8 to 15 days during this stage where the butterfly will kind of form inside, which is quite interesting. And then, as an adult, for about 2 weeks of pupation, the adult will emerge, kind of dry off its wings, and then go off and do its mating things. And the adult wingspan, as I mentioned, is about 8.9 to 10 centimeters, with the wings being quite a 20 orange. And in eastern North American populations, these can be physical dimensions. The males will tend to have larger wings, typically heavier than females, things like that, with some slight sexual dimorphism here and there, which is pretty cool. And these guys, another little fact is these guys actually view the world for a tetrachromatic system, so these guys can kind of see in the see lights in different wavelengths, things like that. But they can also see in ultraviolet, which is pretty interesting. And this quite potentially helps them with their long migratory flights because they're quite good flyers. So in terms of their courtship and mating, these guys will mate in two phases. So during the aerial phase, the male pursues the female and forces her to the ground. And during this ground phase, the butterflies will copulate and for about 30-60 minutes. And only about 30% of mating attempts are successful. That means the female is actually able to avoid them, and some have more success than others. And during this time, the male will transfer a spermatophore into the female, which obviously fertilizes the babies and gets her to lay eggs as well. And females and males will typically mate more than once in their lives and try and mate several times. And as they overwinter in the spring, they'll try to do as much as they can before winter comes. And then they'll have their overwintering sites as well, which is quite interesting. So in terms of their distribution and habitat, as I mentioned, they're found pretty much everywhere. In the Americas, they can be found across southern Canada to northern South America, but they can be found in the Cook Islands, Hawaii, Bermuda, the Solomons, New Zealand, Morocco, the Philippines, Canary Islands, Australia, places like that. But overwintering populations are actually found on the Gulf Coast, and then they will overwinter in Mexico, which as the wintering habitat typically provides them with lots of sunlight and streams and things like that, and helps them to survive. And this quite big migration, they do it on an annual basis, but sadly, because of a lot of things like habitat destruction, things like that, this caused major issues and potentially has caused their populations to decline. And in terms of predators, these guys are preyed on by all sorts of different birds, like robins, sparrows, jays, and things like that. Mostly birds and kind of other insectivores, things like that. And human interactions, people love them. They're the state insect of a lot of different states. People grow butterfly gardens. People captive rear them a lot because they are quite a popular animal, a popular butterfly. Though there are threats, because most of the animals, most of the populations are fine, except for this monarch populations, like the western and eastern midwestern populations in America. They've been declining due to pesticides, climate change as well. People are a little bit worried about that. That migratory population is endangered. Loss of overwintering habitat's a big thing. Parasites and loss during migration is another big issue. Host plants and also changes in climate. But overall, they're doing okay. Conservation efforts to protect these endangered migratory populations have been put in place. As I mentioned, they're considered an endangered species, so have all the legal protections. People have been trying to do butterfly gardens and trying all sorts of different methods to help bolster these populations, which seem to be working out well. Hopefully, hopefully we get them out of endangered. But really, really cool. Let's see if we can find one flying. We already had one before. Wonderful little guys. There we are. I love butterflies so much. These guys are so cool. So let's have a read through their little encyclopedia or zoopedia. So you can see the monarch butterfly. It's not endangered as a whole. Only the eastern populations of the US are kind of endangered. So the nominate subspecies migrates to North America is classified as endangered. So while the global species is least concerned. So they're all fine, but it's mainly due to pesticides, habitat loss, things like that, is while they're declining. As you kind of see here. You can see their range here from Hawaii, and you can see the New Zealand and a lot of these places. And actually, you could probably argue bigger than that. They're vagrant in kind of UK as well, as I mentioned with the Old World Swallowtail. Group size 90, pretty much the same. Average size about 9.5 centimeter wingspan, live 9 months, weight unknown. They are sexually mature at 1 month. They can have babies till they die. 2 to 6 babies per mating event, 0 months gestation, and under 20 month period before interbirth, and they're quite easy to reproduce in captivity. So some populations of monarch butterflies are migratory and will migrate over 4,800 kilometers from Canada to the northern USA to Mexico. It takes about may take 4 generations of butterflies to complete this round trip. So that's quite interesting. And during the migration of the monarchs, thousands of butterflies will cluster together and create the ideal temperature for themselves, which is pretty cool. And when male monarch butterflies attempt to court the females, 30% of the time they'll accidentally grab a male and attempt to mate with him. So probably a little bit awkward, but that's fine. And monarch butterfly caterpillars feed on poisonous milkweeds, which makes them toxic to predators. And the orange-red color on their bodies show that they are dangerous and don't attack me, things like that. But they are eaten by other things as well. And during the caterpillar stage, a monarch butterfly would eat 200 times its body weight in milkweed. So that's pretty interesting. And you can see they're like all the other species as well. So that's our butterflies done for today. So now we're going to be moving on to some awesome animals today. Moving up to the habitat animals. So we're going to be starting off with the striped hyena. So really, really cool animal here. So hyena. So these guys are a species of hyena found in North and Eastern Africa. And they could also be found in the Middle East and Central Asia and even in India. These are the only extant species of the genus Hyenidae, and the global population estimated to be under 10,000 mature individuals, with some decrease. They're actually the smallest of the bone-cracking hyenids and have many different traits that are more primitive than a lot of other their relatives in the larger species, like having a smaller skull, things like that. So really, really cool little thing about them. You can see they're also fairly massive, but they have a short torso and hind limbs as well, with forelimbs a lot longer than the hind limbs, with the relatively thin legs, and they have a large neck that's more immobile, things like that. And these small ears that are always sharply pointed, and like hyenas, this type of species of hyenas, they have these large pads on their paws, as well as powerful claws as well. They also have short and terminal hairs that do not descend their Achilles tendon. And the female striped hyena's genitalia is transcendently masculinized, so they have an enlarged member and things like that, which is very weird of most hyenas, but it's really interesting that they... Well, it's not weird compared to most hyenas, it's just something weird that hyenas have, but really, really cool. Adults typically weigh 22 to 55 kilograms, or about 49 to 121 pounds, averaging about 35 kilograms. So not quite as big as other hyenas. I mentioned they are the smaller one. And they have a shoulder height or a body length of about 85 to 130 centimeters, or 35 to 51 inches, which not counts the tail, and which is about 25 to 40 centimeters, or 9 to 15 inches. And a shoulder height about 60 to 80 centimeters, or about 24 to 31 inches. With the male having a large pouch of naked skin located near his butt, and these glands kind of to obviously, of course, signal things and give lots of social interactions and things, which is quite important for them since they're obviously very into smelling. They also can also release pungent smelling liquid from this gland, very similar to like a skunk, but obviously not quite the same. They have quite good eyesight, but their sense of smell and hearing is weaker compared to most other things. In terms of its fur, you can see these guys have long hair, and then they have these stripes where they get the name striped hyenas, black and white, which is with these long guard hairs as well, which typically probably helps to break their outline in the desert, and also having the black around their eyes helps them reduces the glare, which is quite interesting. And there is some variation on the Arabian Peninsula. They tend to have a blackish mane, and the ones from like the Middle East, things like that, are typically a little bit different and smaller. So the largest striped hyenas come from the Middle East and Asia and Central Asia, India, while the East African and Arabian populations tend to be a little bit smaller, which could be due to competition with other species, potentially, or something like that. In terms of behavior, these guys are primarily nocturnal, and they only leave their den after the onset of total darkness and return before sunshine. They typically live alone or in pairs, though groups of up to 7 animals have been recorded. They're generally not territorial, and their home ranges will often overlap, with home ranges in the Serengeti being up to about 44 kilometers squared, and even up to 61 kilometers squared in some other areas. And while marking their territory, they use their anal pouch, which is called hyena butter, to scent mark and basically make sure that if people know, or the other hyenas know, oh, this is my area, don't mess with me, kind of thing. And while greeting each other, they'll also sniff each other's noses and extrude the anal patch and kind of smell that. And they're not as vocal as many other species of hyena, but they do have like chattering and things like that, which is quite interesting. Let's have a look at the female while that's the male, this is the female, I think. We'll have a look at the female while we're having a look. No, we'll have a look at the babies. That's what we'll do, because these babies are quite cute. So in terms of reproduction, these guys are monogamous, and the male will establish a den with the female and help her raise the cubs. The mating season varies a lot, but they generally can be from Caucasia can be like around January, February. In some places, October, November. It just depends where you are. In captivity, it's non-seasonal because there's obviously ample food all around, with mating taking place pretty much whenever time. Gestation also lasts about 90 to 91 days, with striped hyena calves born with adult markings, closed eyes, and small ears. And then after 7-8 days, their eyes will open and they'll leave their dens after about a month. The cubs are weaned at about 2 months of age and then fed by their parents. And by autumn, the cubs are about half the size of their parents. And in the wild, they can live up to about 12 years, and in captivity, they've been known to live up to 23 years. And in terms of burrowing behavior, these guys will dig their own dens, but they'll also find caves and erosion channels and dens from other animals such as porcupines, warthogs, wolves, and aardvarks that they'll find to live in. And hyena dens can be identified by bones in the entrances, and they typically hide in there in the day from predators, or also the cold or the heat. And then they will often modify these a little bit and create these little chambers. And they actually can get quite big. Hyena dens in Israel can be quite elaborate. They can exceed up to 27 meters in length, but in other places they can be only up to about 5 meters, which is quite interesting. And we'll have a look at these cuties. Now we'll have a look at the female. In terms of their diets, these guys are primarily scavengers, which feed mainly on ungulates with different stages of decomposition. So they'll feed them pretty much whatever they can find. They're scavengers. They'll also hunt down prey, and they've been recorded to feed on kulan, wild boar, porcupines and tortoises in Turkmenistan. But other places they'll feed on grasshoppers and willow fruits and garbage and fruits and pretty much whatever they can get their mouths around, depending where they are. And also they have a lot of interesting. They eat a lot of calcium in their diet, so they have lots of calcium. They often become white very rapidly and can be visual for long differences. So if it's a white poop that you see, it might likely be a striped hyena, which is quite interesting. So in terms of relationships with other predators, they are competes with grey wolves in Central Asia and the Middle East. And a great portion of the hyena's diet comes from wolf-killed carcasses. And the striped hyena is dominant over wolves on one-on-one basis, but often when packs, they often get a little bit overwhelmed. And also red foxes will compete with these guys, and they may give way to hyenas and open carcasses, things like that. But and also they are often scavenged from the kills in Africa by like tigers, leopards, cheetahs, and caracals. And a caracal can actually drive a subadult hyena from a carcass, which is quite interesting. But as I mentioned, these guys' historical range can be found across Africa into Sahel, and can be found like Tanzania, the Arabian Peninsula, the Middle East, the Mediterranean, the Caucasus, Afghanistan, and into India. Though today their distribution is quite patchy because they're considered vulnerable, and this is often due to things like such as hunting, things like that, like predation on live stocks and crops. People kind of pursue them, and they've been sometimes known to kill livestock, goats, sheep, and dogs. And they can be sometimes taken, but it's obviously not a good thing. And also they often feed on melons and things like that as well. And they have been, they're extremely timid to humans, but they have been known to attack humans on very rare occasions. So that's kind of the reason why they're considered hunting as well. Also, they have been killed for a lot of other reasons, so like their coats and things like that. Usually it's a poor quality dog or wolf fur, but they've been known to be sold for that. And that's obviously, along with habitat degradation and hunting, has really caused their populations to decline. But they are quite common in folklores as well. Ancient Greeks and Romans believed their blood and rectum and hair and eyes and things like that was a way to ward off evil and ensure love and fertility. So that's a pretty interesting thing. And in terms of having them in captivity, they're actually easily tamed and can be fully tamed. And even though the ancient Egyptians don't consider them sacred, they did tame them and use them for hunting, similar to caracals, which we'll get into. And they can form bonds with them and things like that, form bonds with dogs and things like that, even though wild hyenas don't really like dogs. Yeah, really, really cute. So let's have a look at their zoopedia. So let's have a look here. So striped hyena, they are near threatened. World's population 5,000 to 10,000. Natural habitat, you can see that's pretty much covers it there. pretty much most of Northern Africa up to Eastern Africa, the Middle East, some parts of Central Asia, and into India. Group size 1 to 2, up to male and female. But bachelor groups can be a little bit bigger, 1 to 7 for both males and females. They're no dominance. They're also monogamous, and they have a neutral relationship with humans and guests can't enter their habitat. Males are a little bit bigger than females, being 73 centimeters tall at the shoulder, and females being 68. Life expectancy is about 16 years on average, but as I mentioned, they can live up to 23. 33 kilos for males and 30 for females. Age of sexual maturity is about 2, and they have sexual sterility until 12 years old. They have 2 to 4 babies per mating event. Gestation period is about 3 months. Into birth period is about 15 months, and they're quite easy to breed in captivity. Let's see if we can find other facts. So they're actually the national animal of Lebanon, which is pretty cool. North Indian folklore suggests that witches and wizards ride striped hyenas at night, which is quite cool. Striped hyenas can be beneficial to urban areas because they are excellent at waste disposal. And in some areas, residents will leave rubbish out for the hyenas to eat. So that's a good service that they do. It's kind of what they do on the savannah anyway. They help clean up stuff. Same with vultures and things like that. Striped hyenas are known to dig up graves and scavenge corpses, which has been led to prosecution by humans, which obviously sucks. And they can be tamed and trained, and be used by ancient Egyptians as hunting companions, as I mentioned. So that's another cool thing like that. And they don't like anyone else, but yeah, really, really cute. I do like these guys. So yeah, next up we have got another cool animal. We're going up to an animal that we've already mentioned a couple times. We have got the Caracal, so a really cool animal here. I love Caracals. It's a big flopper. So the Caracal, these guys are a medium-sized wildcat that can be found in Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, and Pakistan, also in India as well. And you can see they're quite characteristic by this robust build, that short face and long legs. And they're often been thought to be like a lynx, which is quite interesting. So you can see they're a slender cat with like a robust build and a short face. They reach about 40 to 50 centimeters, or about 16 to 20 inches at the shoulder. And the tan bushy tail also extends to the hocks and things like that. And the Caracal is also sexually dimorphic, with females being smaller than males in most body parameters. So that's typically... So you can see how big they are. Decent size. One of the prominent features you can also see as well on their face is the 4.5 centimeter black tufts on their ears, and the 2 stripes on their nose as well, and things like that. And the ear tufts may actually start drooping as the animal ages, so you might go like a little bit, which is quite cute. And they have quite a soft fur, as you can see that, with that reddish markings. And the guard hairs are denser in winter than summer, and the length can be up to about 3 centimeters, but shortened to about 2 in the summer. And these features indicate the onset of molting in the hot season, which is typically from October to November. And the hind legs are longer than the forelegs, and they actually appear to be slightly sloping down the rump, which is quite interesting. Male Caracals at head to body length are about 78 to 108 centimeters, so about 31 to 43 inches, and have 21 to 34 centimeters, or 8 to 13 inch tails. And range between 7 to 19 kilograms, or 16 to 42 pounds. With head to body length, the female is slightly smaller, about 71 to 102, so 28 to 40, with a tail that's 18 to 31 centimeters, so about 28 to 40 inches, and 7 to 12 inches as well, so the body length and the tail length, with females weighing between 7 and 15 kilograms, or about 15 to 35 pounds. And though they're often confused for lynx, these guys are not that closely related. These guys often, even though they can be found with some species of lynx, these guys tend to have a much more flat coat than lynx, because lynx typically have a spotted coat. The African golden cat is also quite similar, but they lack the ear tufts, and also look quite a bit darker as well, which is quite interesting. So it's kind of hard to confuse them with other things. Look at this cutie. We'll watch this cute little animation. Cute. So as I mentioned, these guys are typically found wide range. They can be found south of Sahara, but they're considered rare in North Africa. They can be found in Arabian Peninsula, Turkmenistan, and Western India. They inhabit savannas and lowlands and scrub forests, but they prefer dry areas. They can also be found in Ethiopian highlands at elevations of about 3,000 meters. And they can be found right down into South Africa as well. In terms of their behavior, these guys are typically nocturnal, though activity has been observed during the day as well, but they're mostly secretive. And they're typically not Typically, most active when the temperature drops to about 20 degrees Celsius, or about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and activity once it gets much higher, they typically avoid going around too much. They're also solitary cats, and they often can be found occasionally in pairs, but typically are on their own. And if it's a group, it's most likely a female and her offspring. And they're territorial, so they'll mark their different territories with dung and urine, things like that, similar to most of the cats. And they'll often use scratches as well. With average size of their territories can be depending on where they live. So males can have large territories up to about 1,000 square kilometers sometimes in places like Saudi Arabia. But in other places it can be smaller, especially like Israel, can be about 220 square kilometers. And males typically have much larger ranges than the females, and a male's range will encompass the range of a few different females. So he'll be able to go and mate and do things like that. And they overlap extensively, and they use all sorts of communication, such as growls, meows, hisses, and purrs to communicate with each other. And in terms of their diet, these guys are carnivores, like most of the cats. They typically prey upon small mammals and birds. In South Africa, they prey upon Cape hares, hyraxes, rats, durkas, and gemsbok. And mammals will typically take up most of their diet, and they'll even target young antelopes like kudu, impala, bushbucks, and springbok. And then the remaining is they'll pretty much eat small lizards, snakes, and insects. Also, birds take in quite an important part of their diet, and they're able to jump up to 2 meters in the air to basically grab birds, which is pretty interesting. And they're able to take prey up to 2 to 3 times their size, and can leap more than 3 meters to catch birds on the wing, and also quite adept climbers as well, and can scavenge, but they don't do that too often. And while we talk about the reproduction, we'll have a look at the cute little cubs and the cute little kittens. Very, very cute. So they both become sexually mature at about a year old and produce gametes even early, about 7 to 10 months old. But typically, their first mating event will take place about 15 months old. And the estrus, the female, gets pregnant, and gestation will last about 2 to 3 months, with a litter with up to 1 to 3 kittens. Typically, birth will take place in a dense vegetation or a deserted burrow of aardvarks or porcupines, with kittens being born with their eyes shut and ears shut as well, and their claws will not be retractable. The coat will resemble that of adults, but the abdomen will be spotted, with their eyes opening about 10 days of age, and then they take longer for their vision to become normal. Ears will also become erect, and their claws will become retractable by the 3rd or 4th week of age. And around the same time, they start roaming around, and they have to wait for 3 months before making their first kill, though. And then the kittens start moving by themselves. They start shifting them every day. All their milk teeth appear at about 50 days, and permanent addition is completed about 10 months of age. And juveniles begin dispersing about 9 to 10 months, though a few females will stay back with their mothers. And typically their lifespan, they typically live up to about 16 years in captivity, but we do not know much in the wild. So typically probably 8 to 10 years maybe in the wild. So you can find an adult there. Look at this cutie. I love Caracal so much. In terms of threats, these guys are considered least concern because they're widely distributed and they have lots of different habitats. But they are considered have declined a bit because of agricultural expansion, things like that, and building of roads. Also, some hunting a little bit. Local people kill them to protect their livestock, and also by hunting for the pet trade in some areas. A lot of them are localized, but some are pretty common, like habitat loss and persecution for hunting livestock. But things like that. But they are so common and so widespread they aren't considered in threat of extinction. And they have been extirpated from some areas such as North Africa and come close to extinction there. But overall they're doing okay. They're also considered Appendix 2 and CITES, while the other population's kind of a little bit leaner, or Appendix 1, or a little bit harsher, so basically don't hunt them if you're from India. In South Africa, the least concern are widespread. They're tolerant of human-dominated areas, but they have been prosecuted a lot. And the Central Asian population is considered critically endangered in Uzbekistan since 2009 and Kazakhstan since 2010. And in terms of how people see them in culture, they were quite significant in ancient Egyptian culture and often guarded the tombs of pharaohs. And they were used. They also were used to catch birds in flight and used for coursing and with lots of emperors and things like that. So they'd kill all sorts of game birds, things like that. They were also caught and bred and trained along with cheetahs to be almost treated like royalty and things like that, and take out game, things like that. So that's really, really cool. But yeah, really, really awesome. I do love Caracals. So let's have a look at their little zoopedia. So Caracal, small, widespread wildcat, really cool. Least concerned, but historically they've been tamed. And you can see their range here, quite a wide range as well, quite similar to the one of the striped hyena. 1 to 2, up to a male and female, and one each of each sex. They have no dominance kind of hierarchy. They're also polygamous. They're shy and guest kind into their habitats. Males are slightly bigger on average, with 47 centimeters total shoulder, with females being about 45. Live about 18 years, and weight is males a little bit bigger, 11 kilograms, females 8.9 kilograms on average. 1.5 years age of sexual maturity, and sexual sterility about 15 years of age. 1 to 4 babies per, or 1 to 4 kittens per mating event, with an incubation period about 2 months and 24 months into birth period, with the average reproductibility in captivity. And we'll have a look in here. The word caracal derives from the Turkish caracal, which means black air, which makes sense. The caracal can jump over 3 meters straight in the air and often used to catch airborne birds, which is pretty cool. Also capable of taking down prey 3 times their size. And caracals are also known as desert lynxes due to their lynx-like tough ears and bobtail, which resemble these characteristics. Though they are separate genera, they're not that closely related. And caracals have been trained to assist humans with hunting and are featured in sport hunting where watchers would take bets to how much prey a caracal could catch in a set period of time. So that's another really cool thing. And I guess they don't like living with everyone else. Not surprising. So next up, we're moving on from Africa. We're going to South America, so I'm quite excited to talk about these guys. We have got the 9-banded armadillo. So we've got these cuties here, and I do love how these cuties have come out. So this is the 9-banded armadillo, also known as the common long-nosed armadillo. These guys are a small mammal, a xenotheron, found in North, Central, and South America, and are also the most widespread of armadillos. And their ancestors came from South America, but during the Great Biotic Interchange, when the Isthmus of Panama allowed North America to kind of connect to South America, these guys were able to spread up, and especially during the last 100 years or so, they've really spread, as we'll get into. Really, really cool animals. In terms of description, these guys weigh between 2.5 and 6.5 kilograms, or 5 to 14 pounds. They're the largest ones, can get up to 10 kilograms, about 22 pounds. And head to body length is about 38 to 58 centimeters, about 15 to 23 inches. And then they also have a tail that's also about 26 to 53 centimeters, or 10 to 21 inches, and have a total length of a little under a meter long, or about 64 or 107 centimeters, or 25 to 42 inches. And they also stand 15 to 25 centimeters tall, or 5 to 9 inches at the height of the highest point. And you can see here they've got these large shells that have these ossified dermal scales on here, with that are not overlapping, and they also have these flexible bands, the 9 bands here, where they get their name, the 9-banded armadillo. And this armor pretty much covers their body for the most part, and they also have lots of bands of armor going down their tail and a big plate on their face, which is quite interesting. And the claws on the middle toe of the forefeet are quite a bit larger, and they're used for digging. These guys are very good diggers. And they also have a low metabolic rate and poor thermoregulation. That means they're best suited for subtropical habitats. And unlike the South American 3-band armadillo, these guys can't perfectly roll themselves into a ball, but they capable of floating across rivers by inflating their intestines or sinking and running along riverbanks. So that's quite interesting. The second is also possible to be able to hold their breath up to 6 minutes, and an adaptation originally developed for allowing animals to keep their snouts submerged in soil for extended periods of time. So it's kind of like co-opted, so it's quite interesting. And although 9 of the typically banded of the 9-banded armadillos, the actual number of these bands actually vary a lot depending on their geographical range. And they actually possess teeth typical of all sloths and anteaters, with the small peg-like molars with no enamel, and incisors do form in embryos, but they're quickly reabsorbed, and actually when they're born they don't have them, so it's quite interesting. 9-banded armadillos, in terms of the habitat, these guys like warm, rainy environments. They still mainly live in those areas, but they're very adaptable. So they can live in scrublands, tropical rainforests, and open prairies, but they cannot live in particularly cold or hot environments. They're like pretty much in the middle. and they're not that well insulated, and they have a low metabolic rate. But recently, they've been found as far north as places like Virginia, and several studies suggest that because of climate change, they could get more common in places like that as temperature rises. So the nine-banded armadillo has been rapidly expanding up north into the United States. They were typically found around Mexico, and they crossed that border about the late 19th century, and it was introduced at about the same time. And by 1995, they were established pretty much in most of the lower states, up to like Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and they've been sighted as far as South Carolina, which is pretty interesting. But their natural range in terms they typically live across most of the Amazon and Central and South America, which is quite interesting. And outside the United States, they live down up to northern Argentina and Uruguay, but in north they have a greatly expanded range, of course, of in the US, and we'll get into that. It's quite interesting. Nine-banded armadillos, in terms of their diet, they're generally omnivores or insectivores, so they typically will go around sniffing for grubs and beetles and things like that. They'll feed on ants, termites, grasshoppers, and any small terrestrial vertebrates. They've also been observed to roll into anthills to dislodge and consume those ants. They'll also will eat things such as amphibians and small reptiles during the winter months, and occasionally they'll eat bird eggs and baby mammals. They also will eat maggots off carrion as well, which is pretty interesting. And they'll also feed on tubers, fruits, seeds, and fungi occasionally. And in terms of their behavior, these guys are solitary and they're largely nocturnal, so they typically come out to forage at dusk, and they're quite extensive burrowers, and a single animal actually will maintain up to 12 burrows within its range. They will use these burrows are typically 20 centimeters wide, 7 feet deep, and about 7 meters long, or about 25 feet long. And they mark their territory using urine, feces, typically things like that, and they will excretions from scent glands across their body. And males will hold breeding territories and become aggressive in order to keep other males away and increase their chances of mating with a female. And these territorial disputes are often disputed by kicking and things like that, which is quite interesting. And when they're not foraging, these guys will actually shuffle along fairly slowly and sniff the air for changes, so you're kind of just chilling. In terms of predation, if these guys have alarmed, they can run away quite fast, and occasionally a large predator may be able to ambush an armadillo and break the hard carapace with a well-placed swipe. Due to their softer carapaces, juveniles are typically more common food for predators, more common food for predators. Now look at this cute little animation. But typically these guys' known predators include things such as cougars, maned wolves, coyotes, black bears, jaguars, red wolves, alligators, bobcats, and large raptors. But the leading predator is humans, where they're locally harvested for their meat and shells, and probably thousands of them are killed by people every year. But they're quite common, so it's not a big drama. So let's look at these cute little guys here, little armadillos, the little babies. So mating will take place about 2 to 3 months in a mating season, and typically is July to August in the northern hemisphere, and November to January in the southern hemisphere, where a single egg is fertilized, but implantation can be delayed up to 3 or 4 months. And once the zygote is implanted, they have a gestation about 4 months, in which the zygote will split into 4 identical embryos attached to a common placenta. They're born about 3 ounces, and at birth, the quadruplets will remain in the burrow, living off their mother's milk for about 3 months. And they will begin to forage with their mother and leave their mother about 6 months of age. And nine-banded armadillos typically reach sexual maturity about 1 year of age, and they reproduce every year for the rest of their 12 to 15 years lifespan. And a single female can produce up to 56 babies over the course of her life, and is actually believed to be one of the reasons they're able to kind of expand so quickly is because they're just so good at breeding and able to spread quite fast. And then we'll look at adults. So in terms of their effect on the environments, they cause mild damage to root systems of certain plants, and animals often will find and live in their abandoned burrows, such as burrowing owls, skunks, rattlesnakes, things like that. And they may actually threaten golfer tortoises by aggressively displacing them from their burrows and claiming them for themselves. They've also been shown that some birds, like the fan-tailed warbler, will follow them around and feed on other insects displaced by armadillos. And while they're typically hunted for their meat, while they taste like pork, they're more frequently killed because of their tendency to steal the eggs of poultry and game birds. And this has caused certain populations to become threatened, though the species as a whole is doing okay. They're also quite valuable for medical research, as they're one of the few other mammals and humans that are susceptible to leprosy. And in Texas, these guys have been raised for armadillo racing on the small scale, but a well-established sport, which is quite sad, a little bit sad. But I imagine it is a little bit funny. But there's also things like Hoover hogs. Like during the Great Depression, they were hunted for their meat in East Texas, and was called poor man's pork. And they're often actually considered, with some resistance, the state small mammal of Texas, and they're considered a pest and often found dead on the side of the road because they are kind of spreading really fast. Some people don't really like them. Yeah, I think they're quite cute, and they're still doing okay, so not a problem. So let's have a look at their Zoopedia. So nine-banded armadillo, they're found in grasslands rainforests, as I mentioned. Diopterus novomectus. You can see their range here, the USA, and down into Argentina and Uruguay. Groups 1 to 2, so a male and a female, and bachelor groups about one each. They don't have a dominant system, and their mating is polygamous. They are shy, and humans can enter their habitats, which is quite interesting, though obviously you don't want to risk that leprosy. And their size on average is about 40 centimeters long, live about 15 years, and the males and females are typically about the same size, about 6.25 kilograms on average. Age of sexual maturity is about 2 years of age. They can have babies till they die. They have about 4 babies per mating event. Gestation incubation period is about 7 months, and the interbirth period is about 12 months, and they're quite easy to reproduce in captivity. Some cool facts about these guys. They typically, as I mentioned, 9 bands out on their shell, but they may have 8 to 11 depending on their subspecies or the geographical area they're from. The most widespread armadillo species. And unlike other armadillo species, the 9-banded armadillo cannot roll into a ball, so instead they escape threats by running away or digging a small mound where they're protected by their hard shell. 9-banded armadillos make extensive use of burrows and may maintain multiple burrows at once in the territory, as I mentioned. And 9-banded armadillos give birth to 4 identical pups due to the zygote splitting 4 ways in the womb during pregnancy. So that's pretty cool. And they don't really like living with anyone. But they're still cute. I think they're quite cute. So last, but certainly not least, we've got here the maned wolf, which I'm quite excited to talk about. I do love these guys with the weird stilts. I do love a maned wolf. So the maned wolf is a large canid that's found in South America. They can be found in Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Peru, and Paraguay, though they're considered almost extinct in Uruguay. And they are quite cool. They're considered the largest species of canid in South America. So they typically weigh about 20 to 30 kilograms, or about 44 to 66 pounds, and it's about 90 centimeters or 35 inches tall at the withers, which is quite interesting. And on average, they weigh about 23 kilograms and stand about 90 centimeters tall. And they have a head to body length of about 100 centimeters or about 39 inches, with a tail adding about 45 centimeters, 18 inches. And they're actually the tallest of all the living canids, which is quite interesting. And their long legs are likely adaptation to living in these tall grasslands. And the fur of the maned wolf, as you can see here, is a reddish brown and with these long black legs and that black mane, which is really interesting. They also have a kind of a white bib on their mouth as well, and the kind of white on the tip of their tail. And the mane is erect and typically is used to enlarge the wolf's profile when they're displaying aggression or kind of being threatened. And there are melanistic maned wolves, so they're completely black, but they're quite rare. And little thing about these guys, they're also the closest living relative to the extinct Falkland Island wolf, so that's pretty interesting. So these guys' footprints are quite similar to those of a dog's, but they have small plantar pads, and they can get up to about 7 to 9 centimeters long and about 5 centimeters wide, which is quite interesting. And they also have a distinctive cannabis-like odor to their territory markings. So they've also earned the nickname the skunk wolf, which is quite a funny nickname. And in terms of hunting and territory, these guys typically live in twilight areas. So they typically live in, or typically come out at night. And their active pattern is actually more related to kind of humidity and temperature. Some of those are bush dogs. Typically, peak activity is 8 to 10 a.m. and 8 to 10 p.m. And on cloudy days, they can be active all day, though. And the species likes open fields and foraging in more closed areas to rest, especially during those warmer days. And unlike most large canids, these guys are actually solitary animals and they do not form packs. They typically hunt alone, usually between sundown and midday, rotating its large ears to kind of listen out for prey animals and things like that. And they'll often will kill their prey by pouncing on it and biting its neck or back and shakes the prey if necessary. And there are monogamous pairs typically. They typically will defend a shared territory of about 30 kilometers squared, about 12 square miles. And although outside of mating, they may actually meet only rarely. The territory is crisscrossed by paths as they patrol at night, and several adults may congregate in the presence of a plentiful food source, such as fire-cleared parts of grassland or something like that, where they're able to all find plenty of prey. Both males and females actually use urine to communicate. We'll have a look at the other one. Slightly different color. They'll use urine to communicate and mark their hunting paths and things like that. And they have a very distinctive odor, as I mentioned, like cannabis, hops, and that's get their name Skunk Wolf, which as well. And actually, at the Rotterdam Zoo, the smell actually once sent the police on a hunt for cannabis smokers within the zoo, but it turned out they were the main wolves, obviously pee, and they often include habitats, includes grasslands, riparians, and forests. That's what they like. So I'll have a look at these cute little babies as we go on. So these cute little guys are the mating season has typically ranged from November to April, with gestation lasting about 60 to 65 days, or about 2 months or so. And a litter is born with typically 2 to 6 of these like black furred pups. These guys are a little bit older, so they're not quite as black as they are when they're just born. Each weighs about 450 grams, with pups being fully grown at about a year of age. And during the first year of life, the pups rely on their parents' food. And data of the main wolf's estrus and reproductive cycle mainly comes from captive animals because we don't know too much about the wild. But there are evidence that things like photoperiods, like time of day, things like that, plays quite an important role because captive animals in the northern hemisphere will breed October to February, and in the southern hemisphere will be August to October. Then that shows that photoperiod is quite important. And as I mentioned, gestation lasts about 60 to 65 days, and 2 to 6 pups, with 1 7-pup litter being recorded. Birthing will typically happen in May, but that's obviously due to a lot of the information coming from animals that are in captivity. They open their eyes at about 9 months after they're born, and they are nursed for up to 4 months. And afterwards, the mother will actually regurgitate food for them. And about the 3rd week of age, at about to 10 months old. Then 3 months old pups will actually accompany their mother while they forage. And males and females will both engage in parental care, but it's primarily done by the females. And in terms of once they get old enough, they reach sexual maturity about a year age and then move off. And then, as much as their lifespan, they typically live up to about unknown in the wild. So, but in captivity, they can live up to about 12 to 15 years, with one potentially living up to 22 years in captivity. So, quite a interesting animal in that way. But these guys, what also makes them interesting is that their diet, these guys are omnivores. They typically specialize on feeding on small to medium-sized animals, such as rodents and rabbits. They'll even feed on birds and their eggs, reptiles, and even fish, gastropods, mollusks, and insects. But a large portion of the diet, potentially up to 50% of it in sub-studies, is actually vegetable materials. So that can be sugarcane, bulbs, roots, and fruits, and things like that. With 301 food items being recorded for the main wolf, about 116 of them were plant, 178 were animals. So typically how these guys will hunt, they'll chase their prey, dig holes, and jump in to catch birds, and about 21% of these hunts are successful. But they'll also feed on animals such as pampas deer, as they will try and run them down and try and pursue them. It was also been shown to eat animals such as giant anteaters, bush dogs, and collar peccaries, but whether they were actively hunted or scavenged is not known. And armadillo is also quite commonly consumed, and animals are typically eaten more during the dry season, so they typically feed on more insects and plants in the wet season. And there's a cool animal that has kind of evolved with them. So the wolf apple, the tomato-like fruit, is the main wolf's kind of most common food item. With some exceptions, actually makes up to potentially up to 90% of the diet, between 40 and 90%. And this wolf apple is actually actively sought by the wolf and is consumed throughout the year. But unlike other fruits that can only be eaten in abundance during the rain season, they will actually consume several fruits at a time and disperse their seeds across the area. So these guys kind of have an important relationship. So the main wolf gets a meal, and the wolf apple actually gets to be spread around and germinate in other places. So it's a really interesting relationship, and they're quite important in the ecosystem in that regard. And we'll have a look at these guys. But Also, as well, these guys are ecologically fixable and can survive in many different habitats, especially with human influences. Breed areas also have some small mammals such as the bolo mice and vespa mice that they can eat. And actually, in captivity, if you feed them too much meat, they'll actually have bladder stones. And so, most zoo diets have a lot more fruit and vegetables, and they don't really have as many meat-based, as much as a meat-based diet similar to other dogs and wolves and things like that. But this is quite interesting. And some cool relationships that they have with other species, like the ones that we mentioned with the wolf apple. These guys have many symbiotic relationships with things like the leafcutter ants. They'll often defecate on their nests, and the ants will actually use their dung to fertilize their fungal gardens, and they will discard the seeds and often put them in piles just beside the nest, and also increases their ability to germinate. So it's kind of a win-win relationship for all three of them. And in terms of predators, these guys typically only preyed upon by jaguars and pumas, but they're mostly preyed upon by jaguars. And humans do hunt them. They will hunt them. Generally, they avoid people, but they have been known to take on chicken thieves. And wolves were once considered to kill pigs, sheep, and cattle, although this is now known to be false. But historically, they've been seen as good luck charms as well, and they're often impacted by things such as habitat loss, automobiles, and also feral dogs and domestic dogs passing diseases onto them. There's a conservation thing as well. But in terms of conservation, these guys are not really considered endangered species because they're so wide-ranging. But there's declining populations because of deforestation, increased traffic, urban growth, the spread of diseases from dogs to these guys, especially like parasites and diseases. But right now they are considered vulnerable or near threatened. I believe it's near threatened. Yeah, near threatened, so which is pretty much the one under least concern. But yeah, they're kind of doing okay in that regard. It's in some places they're vulnerable, some places doing better, and they're making steps to kind of like help these guys recover and things like that. So they are a species people care about, and they're doing okay. And human cultures, there's lots of varying opinions about these guys. In some parts they think they're and parts of the animal body can cure like kidney disease and snake bites, bring good luck. In some areas they tend to be either not care about them or think they're like a common animal, or they've been used for different medical things. But that's really, really cool. They are such cool animals. And now that we've finished talking about these guys, we'll talk about their kind of little zoopedia. You see the main wolf, Crisson Brachinerus. So these guys are quite cool. And you can see their range here pretty much. I believe the range is actually quite a bit bigger than that. But they typically like those kind of areas. Really, really nice. In terms of their group size, as I mentioned, they're monogamous or solitary, so typically 1 to 2. The group size is going to be up to 1 to 3. They're no dominance and they're monogamous. They can be confident with humans and guess kind into their habitat. Their size is about 90 centimeters tall at the shoulder. They live for about 14 years and they weigh about 23 kilograms, I believe. There's not too much sexual dimorphism between these guys. Age of sexual maturity is about 2 years old. They can have babies till they die. They have about 1 to 5 babies per mating event. They have a gestation period about 2 months and into birth period about 12 months. And they are quite easy to breed in captivity as well, so it's quite cool. Fun facts, these guys have particularly long legs, which is an adaptation of hunting along grass, mentioned. They have a particularly strong smelling urine that's used for marking territories, which smells like cannabis or hops, which is quite interesting. So due to its name, the maned wolf, despite its name, the maned wolf is not a true wolf. They're the only member of the genus Chrysion, I believe you say that, which means golden dog in Greek. So they are related to a lot of other South American foxes, including bush dogs, and as I mentioned, the Falkland Island wolf, that's where they're kind of related to. Maned wolves are black at birth, but their full fur will gradually change to red as they age, as we can see here. And maned wolves are omnivorous, and in the wild, up to 90% of their diet is made up of the wolf apple, which are fruits that is a tree native to Cerrado, so kind of how they help out. And they can live with capybaras and giant anteaters. So yeah, really, really awesome. So yeah, I think this will be a great place to end the video. We've covered everything now, part 1 and 2. So yeah, I really do enjoy this pack. I love the wonderful selection. It really gives us like a lot of animals that we've kind of been missing. Some really cool ones from South America and Australia, because those two were kind of really lacking in animals and really boosting that diversity of animals up. I really do like this pack. I'm definitely a big fan. So I think this would be a great place to end the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icons to get notified about anything. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.